to Supply Chain Matters. This is the second in my series of conversations with true experts in sustainability, and we're talking about decarbonizing supply chains. Joining me today is an old colleague, Neil Hawkins, who's currently the president of the Fred and Barbara Erb Foundation, but before that, he worked at Dow for 31 years and was really instrumental in building Dow's sustainability culture and the path they're on today. Neil and I actually crossed paths a number of times through my career there. And welcome, Neil. It's really good seeing you again. You look great. Yeah. I think non-corporate life is treating you well.
Well, Mark, I really appreciate your having me on. This will be interesting and fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So my first question is just a standard question of, you've been around sustainability for 30 plus years, world-renowned expert in it. How has that area evolved during the course of your career? And then maybe more importantly, where do you see it going in the future?
Well, when I first joined Dow, it was really, so that was 1988. It was very early in the journey of sustainability. Sustainable development had just been defined by the United Nations. So it was very, very early. So yeah, for sure, I've seen a tremendous change over the years. I'd say the biggest change has been the integration to business and the movement away from it being regulatory to being of strategic importance to businesses that are thinking ahead and really trying to do its part, yet make very good profits at the same time.
It's been interesting the last, the decade, and especially the last 5 years. You've really seen an explosion of companies making sustainability commitments, but not only sustainability commitments, but ESG commitments as well. And initially, I think it was driven a lot by, B2C companies, which, is understandable. But now you see more and more B2B companies and really far upstream companies making just as bold commitments, tough to achieve commitments. You alluded to that. Why do you think that is? What's really driving it for these companies?
Well, Dow first made its initial commitments 25 years ago, so a long time ago, and we were early in that. What I think has changed, though, and what drives it are really consumer expectations. Consumers don't want to buy products that are bad for the environment, and preferably they want to buy products that are good for the environment, not just not bad, but rather good. And so companies, whether they're consumer facing, B2B, wherever they are in the value chain, they have to be cognizant of that, because at the end of the day, there is no business unless somebody's buying a product that either is a service or goes in their home or what have you.
Okay. Kind of just building off of that. I've read a couple articles about, noting the kind of this real growth in this area, but a few of them actually question whether it was just a fad or whether, and when tough times might hit, that companies would abandon those kind of goals ultimately, because the bottom line is what really matters in a sense in terms of business. Right now might be a perfect test for that theory. What are you seeing in the middle of this pandemic, and how sustainable are these sustainable goals?
Yeah, I based upon what I'm seeing during pandemic, but also what I saw during the Great Recession, if anything, these major discontinuities drive more change, because it provides an opportunity for companies to accelerate their implementation. And I see that with countries and companies right now that are doubling down on renewable energy commitments and alternative energy commitments, climate commitments, not pulling back, but rather accelerating. I think that'll be true really out of this pandemic. I don't expect retrenchment because consumers are going to want products that are safe and healthy for them and that don't harm the environment, plain and simple. So I don't think that changes due to pandemic. If anything, it accelerates.
Okay. Couple thoughts as you were speaking. One, as we've kind of really looked at our value chain, the solar industry, we've come to realize that really not every solar panel is created equal. And depending on how the components in that solar panel were made and where they were made, the embedded carbon in that solar panel might be up to 50% or more less than a standard solar panel. And so like when you pick a typical 100 megawatt solar array, pretty standard size for an industrial scale solar array, an ultra low carbon solar panel array might have what is equivalent to 100,000 less cars on the road versus a standard panel. I guess a couple of questions really. From your perspective, how does that strike you as a value proposition in the scheme of everything? And then number two, we're a relatively small company, really far upstream, away from most of the very large end users. How might a company like us go about getting broader realization or awareness of that, and then maybe traction in that space?
Yeah. Well, first off, you're in a good business for the long haul. And what I mean by that is solar technology is something that the world wants moving forward. So you're in a good area. Now, per your question, does it matter that you produce equivalent or better products with lower energy consumption, better carbon profile? Absolutely. There is a strong demand for that amongst progressive companies, and there are many progressive companies. Plus, over time, the average company moves towards where the progressive companies are. So as a trend, you're in a good business producing electricity by means that are much better for the environment. And then two, if you're producing at half the amount of carbon emitted per your product, that's a plus. Relative to how do you get that word out, I think it's one, you got to have rock solid evidence and proof that it's true, and I presume you do, but you have to have that. And then two, I think it's important to have others besides yourself telling your story. So it could be customers, it could be NGOs, it could be government, could be your energy suppliers. I mean, there are a lot of options, but I think in general for a B2B company, it always is helpful to have other people also amplifying and telling your story. To the extent you can, also publishing around that is useful, just so it's in the peer-reviewed literature.
Great, thanks. That's really helpful. Kind of following along with that theme of supply chain decarbonization, initially a lot of companies were making commitments around scope 1. Dow actually just announced commitments around scope 1, 2, and 3, our old company. Is that the trend you see the industry going, is looking further down the supply chain and, not just scope 1, but also scope 2 and then ultimately scope 3? Is that the trend you're seeing?
I think that advocates are looking for companies to make commitments, but even more important than commitments, make progress versus those commitments in those three areas. So yeah, I do think that there is a trend for that. Now, at some point, the scope 3s of one company overlap the scope 1s of another company. And so when all companies are doing their share, it can all work out. But right now, and I'm saying for the next decade, We're definitely in a pattern where leading companies probably will address upstream and downstream of themselves and
Right.
do the best they can to help make a lower carbon supply chain or value chain.
Right. One of the, as I indicated, we're really just starting on our sustainability journey here at Hemlock. Historically, we've spent a lot of time and energy focused on using less electricity and less raw material to make our products, which is where a lot of our carbon footprint comes from. But we're now thinking about it much more broadly in terms of everything from the fleet of cars we have on site. Do we have way too many, and what types of cars, to the materials we have in our lunchroom. Should we really be using styrofoam versus biodegradable material or something else? And as you mentioned, you were at a Fortune 50 company for 30 years. You're at the beginning of their journey through the end. What kind of advice would you have for a company like ours as we really start, our more robust journey down this path of things that we should really focus on, and maybe some pitfalls we should try to avoid?
Yeah, well, whenever I am asked a question like that, I think about what is the value proposition of sustainability for a company. And there are four primary parts. First is bottom line growth. Second is top line growth. Third is attracting, retaining, and developing top talent. And fourth is having platforms for collaboration. Now, on the first one, on bottom line growth, that's all about efficiency and saving money.
Right.
But in your case, it also makes your product more sustainable to a buyer.
Right.
So it's win-win. And top line growth is what I was saying earlier. You're headed in the right direction with the type of products. It's growing with the trends and growing with the waves. And then, of course, talent is an issue that all companies care about, but it does matter to this generation and the next one a lot. But last, and I mentioned a minute ago, platforms for collaboration. This will provide you, this kind of focus will provide many opportunities with your customers, with your suppliers, with NGOs and government. And I think approaching this openly, transparently, with a collaborative spirit, it's what we tried to do at Dow. I think it worked well for Dow. The other thing that you're doing that I like a lot and I think is essential for success, and that's integrating it to the business. Your business knows what it's all about in terms of carbon profile and what need you're trying to meet. And I think the more a business understands itself and how it integrates to their strategy, the faster you can go and the better alignment you can have with all your employees, which is really important.
Yeah. Wouldn't mind building off, you've mentioned collaboration a few times, and you've had a lot of collaborative experiences in your career across different NGOs, government, and something that we've been talking about, like in the business world, oftentimes when you're sitting at a table with someone, they view the world as a zero-sum game. If I get more, you get less, and vice versa. And we've been thinking about trying to look at it a little more collaboratively, of like, instead of fighting over a single pie and who gets the biggest piece, how do you make the pie bigger for everyone, and having different kind of collaborative relationships than maybe historically have had. You want to say a few more words maybe about some of your experience with, say, private government collaborations, private NGO collaborations, and some advice for us as we start to go down those paths ourselves?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, collaboration is critical for sustainability and sustainable business. So I think you have to find a way to do it. And you have to collaborate with partners that don't necessarily agree with you on some things. You have to find a way to focus on where you have common objectives and then work together. It could be with government, so you're being regulated by the same group that you're collaborating with, okay, or NGOs that might oppose something you're doing but support you in other ways. And I think approaching it with great transparency, humility. Don't approach a collaboration thinking you have all the answers. It's being open to listening. I always used to say, and I still do, sustainability is all about listening. And companies or NGOs or whomever that listen well, they can get to better answers. But if a company is in a mode of telling and having a viewpoint and telling people, it's harder to collaborate. So I know those are soft skills that are more associated with people rather than companies, but you're CEO of a company. I think you want the culture and character of your company to be one of listening and collaborating, being open. And one other thing, you talked about coming to the table and, whether or not you're fighting over a pie. The concept I always thought about is, how do we sit down at the table on the same side of the table and work a problem together versus being across from each other? So just as a concept, I think the more you can do that, where you're all working to solve a problem together, is much better than looking across the table, talking about something where you really are providing viewpoints versus trying to solve a problem together.
Well, that's great advice. It sounds like any relationship, more listening and less talking is always valuable. So really appreciate it. I think we're out of time here, Neil. I guess one last broad, simple question. Any last words or advice and wisdom for me as we start off on our journey here?
I think you're off to a great start. I would definitely talk to actors up and down your supply chain and to your right and left, government and NGOs, and listen a fair amount, and then try to find a set of partners that want to help carry this forward together, tell the story together, and really get to the end point, which is sustainable alternative electricity with the lowest carbon footprint possible as fast as possible. My guess is you have a lot of players out there that want to get there. So I'm optimistic for what you're doing and wish you well.
Well, thanks a lot, Neil. Again, really appreciate the time. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot, and it was great seeing you again.
Yeah, Mark, great. Thank you for having me.